Hi, you know what bothers me? It's not even the existence of suffering. It's the lie we tell about it, to avoid an answer that would confront our own faith and what we were taught about it.
What lie?
When something difficult happens, when someone faces a serious illness, loses someone they love, goes through an injustice, we know exactly what the answer is going to be. Always the same one. And it never ever really answers anything.
What answer?
God knows what he's doing. We are servants. He is God. Everything has a purpose. You'll understand later. Basically, accept it. Be quiet. Trust and don't ask questions.
But those answers don't work for you.
So no. And more importantly, they don't work for the person who is actually going through the hardship. Because those answers aren't about comforting the person who is suffering. They're about comforting the person who is listening.
Explain that.
When you say, God knows what he's doing to someone who is broken, you're not answering their question. You're protecting yourself from the tension of the question. You're saying, I don't know how to answer, so I'm going to pretend we already have the answer.
But maybe we do.
Do we? Then answer this. What is the purpose of someone suffering unjustly? What greater good specifically justifies that suffering?
No one can answer that.
Exactly, because there is no answer. There's only avoidance.
But what about free will? Not all suffering is God's fault.
True. When someone makes a bad choice and suffers the consequences, that responsibility is theirs. But not everything is a choice. An accident, an illness, a situation beyond anyone's control. If God created a universe where those things inevitably happen, then he created a system that guarantees suffering no one asked for.
So free will doesn't answer it.
No, and people know that. That's why when free will doesn't work, they move on to the next answer.
This will bring you closer to God.
Yes, suffering is spiritual growth. You suffer, you become wiser, you get closer to God. Except, not every hardship leads to growth. Sometimes it just breaks a person. And you don't need to be broken in order to grow.
And that answer doesn't work?
It works, until you sit beside someone who has lost everything and realize that no amount of spiritual growth will bring back what was lost. That's when you realize you're offering spirituality as comfort, not as an answer.
What's the difference?
Comfort is, you suffered, but you learned something. An answer is, here's why you needed to suffer. Those are completely different things, and we mix them together, pretending that comforting someone is the same as answering them.
So what's the real problem here?
The problem is a question that has existed for centuries. Philosophers call it theodicy. Basically, how can an all-powerful, perfectly good God coexist with unjust suffering?
And what's the answer?
This is where it gets interesting. There are only 3 logically possible answers, and none of them is comforting.
What are they?
First, God is not all-powerful. He wants to eliminate unjust suffering, but he can't. He's struggling against reality too, just like we are. The consequence? You can't trust God with everything. He's trying, but he may have limits.
The second?
God is all-powerful, but he is not perfectly good. He can eliminate suffering, but he doesn't want to. Maybe he has reasons we don't understand, or maybe he simply works differently than we expect. The consequence? God is not who we imagine him to be.
And the third?
Both are true. God is all-powerful and perfectly good. But unjust suffering is necessary. Hardship has to happen in order to achieve a greater good that you will never be able to see, because you are too small to understand the full plan.
Which one do you believe?
And that's the thing. All of them are logically possible. And I can't believe that any of them is comforting. Every one of them breaks something you want to be true about God.
So there's no way out.
Well, there is a book in the Bible that is honest about this, Job.
The guy who went through a lot of hardship?
Exactly. Job loses everything, his health, his stability, his family, and he spends the whole book questioning God, saying it's unfair, complaining, demanding an answer. And you know what God does? No. Basically, God says, "You are too small. There's an entire universe at stake. You don't understand." And Job then responds, "You're right. I don't understand." And he accepts it.
But that doesn't answer anything.
It doesn't. But it does something that may be more important. It acknowledges that the question is legitimate. Job is allowed to question. God doesn't silence him. God doesn't say, "Don't ask questions." God hears the question and answers honestly, "I'm not going to explain it."
What's the difference between that and leaders who say, trust without questioning?
Everything. Because Job questioned God. The Bible doesn't say that was a sin. It says it was legitimate. And then Job chose to trust, not because he received a satisfying answer, but because God was greater than any answer.
So the message is trust even though you don't understand?
No. The message is question fully, understand that there is no satisfying answer. Recognize that you are too small to understand the entire plan. And then, if you still want to, choose to trust. But not blindly. Honestly.
And what's the difference between blind trust and honest trust?
Blind faith is, I'm going to accept the standard answer so I don't have to think. Honest faith is, I have thought this through completely. I know the alternatives. I recognize that none of them is comfortable. And even so, I choose to trust, not against reason, but with my eyes open.
And what if someone can't make that choice? What if they're too hurt?
Then they don't make it. And that is legitimate too. Some people look at reality and say, if God allows unjust suffering and doesn't explain it, I can't believe he is good. That is a rational conclusion. Many people end up there.
And do you think they're wrong?
No, I think they're confronting the same reality we all are and reaching a different conclusion. And I respect that. What I respect less is pretending there is a clear answer when there isn't.
So what's the final message?
The message is suffer honestly. Question the way Job questioned. Don't suppress doubt. Explore the possibilities that God may be limited or that he may work differently than expected, or that you may be too small to understand. And then you decide. You reject or you trust despite the doubts. But you decide honestly, not with ignorance disguised as faith.
And if someone is going through a really hard season right now, too wounded to think,
then don't think, just suffer. Allow the hardship to be hardship. Don't search for a reason, because sometimes there is no reason, it's just hard. And it's okay to admit that it's hard.
But later, when the pain eases,
later you question, the way Job questioned, and you discover what you can live with and what you can't. And you build your faith or your disbelief from there, honestly. Comment now, what is your honest answer to the problem of evil? Which of the three possibilities can you live with? Or can you live with none of them?
and is it worth sharing?
It is, because someone listening may be in that same struggle, and knowing they're not alone, that the question is legitimate, that questioning is not a sin, may be more important than any answer I could offer.